What do we have? We have a mass movement around the world to impose tariffs, impose higher labor costs in the form of higher minimum wage, more social services, and massively rising input costs, anything to do with energy, which is pretty much everything. I mean, what good is produced and distributed without energy? Those are the only ones that wouldn't be affected by this. People will call it inflation, but it's energy is becoming scarcer and more expensive. Businesses are getting hit with massive increases on the cost side with very limited ability to pass higher prices on the output side of the business, so their margins are under further pressure. And it's margins ultimately drive their bid on the interest rate. In other words, who the heck wants to expand when their margins are getting crushed and the cost of interest is too high? So I think interest rates will have to come down. That's what Trump wants anyway. He's now got his pick of governor that, although he's very politic about it, well, I'm going to see what the market says or whatever Marshall's statement said, pretty clear. He knows what his boss wants. He knows what he was hired to do, and interest rates will resume falling. And I think with that, there will be a general signal to, come back into the gold waters. It's safe again. And, for a while it probably will be, but I think we're in a general rising gold price trend. So at the beginning of the year in the Outlook report, I think I predicted 6,000 or 6,500 by the end of the year. Is that still on? It's possible. We'll see when we get to the Indian monsoon season, how much, the Indians can buy. And of course, a 15% tariff is the headwind. So it could be that it pushes everything to the right, but I think that the drivers are still there, the trend is still there. And I also suspect that as we'll just call it war headline fatigue, when the war first started and all these things are happening and oil going crazy, everyone's like, oh my God, how do we respond to this? And there was selling pressure because oil traders and others. And then, for a couple of 3 months, gold is trading according to the prospects for peace or war. But I don't think that lasts forever. I think people get to a point where they're like, okay, fine, the new reality is there's conflict in the Straits of Hormuz and Iran and this and whatever. Do they just forever stay away from the gold market as a result of that? I don't think so. I don't think it works that way. At some point, everybody returns to gold for all the reasons why they were there in the first place before January. None of that's changed.
We get a little bit of uncertainty that actually becomes certainty. The world is quite pliable, so we get used to the fact that the Strait of Hormuz might be intermittently closed, and we find other ways to do our business because we're going to do our business. That's what people do. So, is that maybe a pathway out of it? Maybe so that your $6,500 call for this year, does that actually give us a chance to hit that, or is there just too many headwinds? I mean, to me, it's always Eurodollar universe. We're always going to talk about the dollar liquidity stuff, which is always lingering there. As you mentioned earlier on, as long as the conflict is ongoing, there is that very real mechanical relationship there where, people are going to have to sell reserve assets to raise dollar liquidity. And gold is, as a reserve asset, that's one that you can sell pretty easily. Is that too much of a headwind, or does that headwind diminish as well?
I would think that headwind diminishes because I would think that the people who are
Eventually, people stop paying the margins and start to close out of their trades and say, okay, let's stop
well,
this
or
madness.
the people that had gold for that purpose.
Yeah.
People buy gold because it's saleable in crisis. But do you get to the point where, and I think you do, with the people who bought gold for that purpose, who are now the primary victims suffering in this crisis, are sold the gold that they bought for that purpose. And so the selling pressure sort of depletes itself. Yeah, I think it does. Gold is a funny thing because here's how I put it. It's the only commodity in which 7.5 billion people in this world are potential buyers at the right price and under the right conditions. And everybody who owns gold, which is not 7.5 billion people, but I'm sure it's got to be 3 or 4 billion people, are all, every ounce that is held in somebody's hands, and virtually all the ounces mined in thousands of years of human history are still in somebody's hands. Every one of those ounces is potential supply at the right price under the right conditions. So if the marginal traders in the gold market have come used to the 4,000 is now the magic line versus 5,500 or whatever. They may think that it's worth 4,000, not 5,500. And so sell the blips as it goes up, buy the dips as it goes down. And you see 4,000 becoming the new normal for a while. Sure, that absolutely, and that's just the pure psychology of it, as everyone has a constantly shifting notion of what a good price is and what a high price is. But I do think that buying forces will win the day in the end. There's too many reasons to buy gold, and too many people who haven't bought any gold yet, and too many people that have bought a little bit of gold, but they're not satisfied and they want more. At some point, those forces reassert themselves. And, selling pressure from oil traders, there's only so much of that, or governments for that matter. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
Iran must be selling gold in order to, pay for imports of whatever it needs to import. And Russia probably selling gold. Now they have to import fuel. They have to import all sorts of things. The Ukrainians have wrecked their production capacity on so
So
many of these things.
does it get to a place where there's like a perfect storm for gold where you mentioned before that, some of the stackers and some of the other Western type of traditional gold buyers have been kind of sitting out the market? Is there a set of conditions? Maybe it's the lower interest rate trigger, a set of conditions where we get every single pocket is saying, I want gold. And it's not just a short term thing or a set of idiosyncrasies where you've got India's back on board. The Middle East and the Arabs are buying gold. Turkey's buying gold. The Russians are buying some gold back to it. The Chinese keep buying gold and the Western stackers start buying gold together. Is that potentially a scenario that we're looking for? Or is that sort of just,
I mean, a big part of me says, I hope not. Right.
yeah. Well,
Because,
that's the other side of this is
I mean,
why would they be doing so? Because that's not a good set of
it's a terrible
circumstances.
world. I mean, I remember some stupid headline. Every once in a while in an interview, I bring this up. Someone said if North Korea launched nukes at South Korea and at LA, it would be good for gold. And I just went off on that. And I'm like, what the bleep is wrong with you? You know,
Yeah.
like, yeah, the world sucks and we're all dying of radiation poisoning, but at least the gold price is
Starvation, but
$10,000.
buy your gold.
But no, but you can sell your gold at $10,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be a horrible world. I can think of at least two, maybe three obvious catalysts. One is, the resumption of falling interest rates. The other is another step up in, we'll just call it fiscal profligacy. Like post-COVID, we had the CARES Act that was, what was it, $2.8 trillion or something, on top of the wild deficits we already had before that. Those would be two obvious drivers. Maybe a third would be some other diminishing of the US. It's not so much the dollar stature, because there is no, and we've had articles about this, Tina, there is no alternative. There's no paper currency that can
Yeah.
remotely replace it.
Doesn't that also feed into the mistrust? Because there's a sense, okay, yeah, we're kind of stuck with the dollar, but being stuck with the dollar is not the same as embracing it. And being
Yeah,
stuck with the dollar
exactly.
system is sort of like, the old quote, holding a tiger by its ears or holding a wolf by its ears. We don't like it. And the fact the longer we're stuck with the dollar, the more we're like, hey, this is not going to work. And eventually something snaps. So the longer we're stuck with the dollar, that argues for something else too.
Right. And I think I have to assume, and we've made, Monte Metals and myself made quite a bit of noise all around the world with this idea, whether we're the origin of it or whether people are coming into it on their own. It should be pretty obvious that gold is the only thing that can replace the dollar. It's not going to be the euro. It's not going to be, the yuan, give me a break. Some basket involving rupees and rubles and rand and Brazilian real. Come on. That is
Yeah,
just a joke.
there's no BRICS currency out there.
No, it's not even the euro. It's not. It's nothing. But gold is the one thing that could do it. And as gold inches forward towards being more and more used in real transactions and not just being held in a vault waiting for a higher price, that becomes a self-fulfilling or positive feedback loop, ascending spiral, right? As people perceive that owning gold is essentially owning optionality on the remonetization of gold. And so as remonetization becomes more obvious to more people, I'm in the middle of it. So yeah, it's obvious to me because this is what I do for a living. But for everybody else, it's not as obvious right now. And if you're in the US, it may not be obvious at all. One thing I like to talk about, I was interviewed by a Bloomberg reporter at a Bloomberg India. And so at the end, she asked me, she said, how is gold perceived differently in the US versus in India? I said, oh my God, night and day.
Yeah, it's almost not perceived in the US outside of people who are, close followers of gold. Gold just doesn't enter the conversation all that much.
So I said two things. I said, one is, and I argue with Western analysts, and I know most of them personally, they talk about there's jewelry demand and there's investment demand. And, in India, in the Arab world, and the Turkish world, it's one and the same. They buy gold by weight, and each piece is advertised what the spread is, the spot, and there's a screen in the jewelry store telling you what the spot price is. They buy it the way Americans buy, gold eagles. There aren't two different demands. But the other is, I said, and this is when she really just totally couldn't believe it. I said, in the US, less than 1% of people would have any gold. I said, in India, I assume it's pretty much 100%. So she just laughed. I said, of course. And I said, I can only picture if I was interviewed by a Bloomberg correspondent in the US asking me how it is in India, where in India, I would say, well, everybody owns gold. And the Bloomberg reporter in the US would kind of laugh at that. And that's how this Indian reporter was laughing when I said, almost nobody in the US has it. That's unreal to them. They can't even, it would almost be like if I said, oh yeah, over there in Europe, nobody has food, they don't eat. You kind of laugh and say, okay, come on, right? I mean, they have McDonald's, they have food. That's how the Indians regard, like, really? Americans don't have any gold? Like, what? That's the difference. And I think as Americans begin to perceive gold as moving back into the monetary system in some way, then it becomes a smart trade to say, okay, if I buy some gold, even if I don't plan to use it as money, I don't believe in any of that stuff. Magic voodoo, I'm a modern person who believes in Keynes and Friedman, paper currency, but it's a good trade for optionality. So why wouldn't you, even if you're just a paper portfolio kind of guy, you just say, okay, if gold's going to come back in the monetary system, surely it'll be repriced at a higher price than it is now. Probably true as far as it goes. And what they don't realize that in gold standard, there is no such thing as a price of gold. Prices are set in money terms, right? We're a while away from that, but right now I think we're going to see gold used to settlement. There are countries that either can't use it, locked out of the dollar system, or prefer not to, or whatever, where gold actually makes more sense than any paper currency. And that's going to lead them to say, hey, can we put it to work, get some interest on it in the meantime? There's all these things that are happening at the margin.
That's the key
Um,
point, right? I think right at this stage, it's optionality. And the other part of it is gold is categorically different. I think that's a great point you just made. The euro and the US dollar, there's just denominations within the euro dollar system. They don't really mean much as far as, distinctions. Certainly not meaningful distinctions when we're talking about monetary evolution. So if you're thinking, okay, greater mistrust, the system doesn't seem to be work, more people are opting out of the system, you need something that could potentially be categorically different. There are not many other options on the table here. Like you said, even if you're not thinking gold is going to come back and win over the entire world again, just being prudent, you want to have some allocation of gold because you're thinking optionality. It could possibly happen, and the more people who think that possibility is rising, the more gold is going to be at least in the discussion somewhere meaningfully. So preserving optionality, I think, is the best way to describe the long run trend in gold going back to 2019. That more and more people are saying this doesn't work, and it doesn't work in more and more places. And so we don't know what the future looks like, but we know what the past looked like. And when gold was a monetary metal, when it was the preeminent monetary metal, things tended to look pretty good at various times. So optionality, I think, is the key word here.
But my guess would be, right, and your audience is obviously not the typical, normies or muggles, right? I mean, because they're
Right.
thinking about things that typical people aren't. But my guess would be very few, if any, people watching this episode are going to say, you know what, that damn guy's right. I'm going to go buy some gold ring. My guess would be today is not the day for that thought to just light up in people's brains and
No.
make them reach for the endorphins and the gold and just buy it. Today, July 13, I think probably not. But over the coming months and years, as people read other headlines of other things that are happening, whether it be monetary metals press releases or whether it be whatever, that thought will increasingly recur in a way that has much greater, not even credibility, but just impact versus hearing an interview
Or
like
just
this.
no, Keith, just plausibility, right? Because we're coming from a period where gold isn't in the discussion, and now when anybody raised gold during that period of time, people, oh, the guy's crazy. What the hell is he talking about? Gold
Crazy
has.
stuff, right?
So as long as it doesn't even need to become fully plausible, it just needs to become somewhat plausible that people are saying, oh crap, this is actually a chance. And as soon as that happens, then the pool of people who haven't bought gold suddenly expands exponentially.
Right, which is not July 13, which is why
No.
gold price is languishing at $4,000, but yeah, things will happen. And of course, these things tend to be on this exponential accelerating curve where they don't seem to be happening for a long time. If you're really watching the curve, you could argue it's a flat line at zero for a really long time. And then when it turns up, everyone's like, oh my God, where that came out of nowhere. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
14-year overnight trend. You just weren't paying attention for the first 13 years because it looked flat.
That's because everybody was distracted by the BRICS currency or something.
Stupid.
Yeah.
That's right.
The portfolio that performs in one economic regime can get crushed in the next. So in this free webinar, we're going to reveal what those 4 economic regimes are, how to identify them, as well as the assets, historically speaking, best positioned to perform in every environment. So reserve your seat now and learn how to prepare your portfolio before the economy shifts again.